Shadows at the border. The evening mist hung low over the border checkpoint, casting long shadows across the weathered concrete barriers. Rain Holloway adjusted her patrol jacket, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape where hope and desperation collided. 12 years of border service had taught her that every shadow held a story, every silhouette a life waiting to be understood. A distant movement caught her attention. Unlike the routine crossings she had witnessed countless times, this approach was different. Cautious. Hesitant. A small figure emerged from the fog, moving with an uncertainty that spoke of both fear and determination. As the figure drew closer, Rain realized it was a young boy, no more than 12 years old. His clothes were worn, patched together from various fabrics that had seen better days. A tattered backpack hung from his shoulders, suggesting a journey far longer and more complicated than any child should endure. "Stop right there," Rain called out, her voice firm but not unkind. Years of experience had taught her that compassion could be as powerful a tool as any regulation. The boy froze, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and exhaustion. He looked ready to bolt, his thin frame tense like a cornered animal. Rain raised her hands, a universal gesture of peace. "My name is Rain," she said softly. "What's your name?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of border surveillance equipment and the whisper of wind through chain-link fences. "Ezra," the boy finally whispered, his voice barely audible. Captain Marcus Reaver would have approached this differently. His reputation for strict enforcement was well known throughout the Border Patrol. He believed in rules, in clear-cut boundaries, in maintaining order at all costs. But Rain had always seen beyond the regulations, understanding that every person carried a narrative more complex than simple paperwork could capture. "Are you alone, Ezra?" she asked, taking a careful step forward. The boy's eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. But exhaustion and hunger had worn down his defenses. His backpack seemed to weigh more than his slight frame could bear. "I'm looking for my aunt," Ezra mumbled. "She lives somewhere past the border. I have an address." Rain knew the chances of such a simple reunion were slim. The border was a place of broken promises, of dreams interrupted by bureaucratic walls both literal and metaphorical. Refugee stories were rarely as straightforward as a child's hope. "May I see the address?" she asked, her tone gentle. Ezra hesitated, then slowly reached into his pocket. The paper he pulled out was folded countless times, edges frayed and soft from repeated handling. When he handed it to Rain, she noticed his hands were trembling. The address was written in careful, childish handwriting. But something about it seemed off. The street name looked slightly blurred, as if copied from memory rather than directly transcribed. "Where are you from, Ezra?" Rain asked, studying the boy's face. A flicker of pain crossed his features. "From a place that doesn't exist anymore," he said cryptically. In that moment, Rain understood that Ezra carried more than just a backpack. He carried memories, loss, a journey that had stripped away everything except the most fundamental human desire, to find safety, to find home. Captain Reaver would be approaching soon. His footsteps were predictable, his ideology rigid. Rain knew she had moments to decide how to handle this situation. The regulations were clear, unaccompanied minors were to be processed, documented, potentially returned. But something in Ezra's eyes told a different story. A story of survival, of hope clinging to the thinnest of threads. "Come with me," Rain said finally. "Let's get you something warm to eat, and then we'll figure out our next steps." As they walked towards the border station, the mist seemed to part, revealing a landscape of uncertainty. Ezra's story was just beginning, and Rain knew her decision in these next few moments could change everything. The border was more than just a line on a map. It was a threshold between what was lost and what might still be found. Whispers of the displaced. The community center buzzed with a quiet intensity that spoke of countless untold stories. Elena Rodriguez moved between rows of chairs, her clipboard filled with notes from interviews with displaced families. Each page represented a fragment of human resilience, a testament to survival against overwhelming odds. Ezra sat in the corner, a steaming cup of hot chocolate clasped between his hands. Since Rain had brought him to the center, he had spoken little, his eyes constantly scanning the room as if searching for something, or someone. Another cup. Daniel Sinclair approached, his journalist's notebook tucked under his arm. Unlike many of his colleagues, Daniel saw beyond sensationalism. He understood that every refugee story was a complex tapestry of human experience. Governor Helena Thornbridge swept into the room, her crisp business suit a stark contrast to the worn clothing of those around her. Her presence immediately changed the atmosphere, a mix of tension and anticipation filling the air. "Ms. Rodriguez," the governor called, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. "A moment of your time." Elena approached, her professional demeanor masking the internal tension she felt. She knew the governor's reputation for political maneuvering, the delicate dance between humanitarian concerns and bureaucratic interests. "I've been reviewing the reports," Thornbridge began, her eyes briefly flickering to Ezra. "The number of unaccompanied minors has increased significantly this quarter." Daniel watched from a distance, his journalist's instinct sensing a story brewing. The way the governor studied Ezra was more than casual interest, there was something calculated in her gaze. "Each child has a story," Elena responded carefully. "They're not just statistics." Ezra's ears perked up, though he seemed to be deliberately avoiding direct eye contact. Daniel noticed the boy's subtle tension, the way his fingers gripped the cup just a fraction too tightly. A commotion at the entrance interrupted their conversation. A group of newly arrived refugees entered, families with weathered faces, children clinging to parents, their belongings reduced to what could be carried in a few bags. "We need to discuss resource allocation," Governor Thornbridge continued, her voice dropping to a more private tone. "The current support system is reaching its breaking point." Elena knew what that meant. Behind bureaucratic language lay decisions that could devastate lives. Resource allocation often meant reduction of support, of hope. Daniel approached Ezra, his journalist's intuition telling him the boy held more than he was revealing. "Would you like to tell me your story?" he asked softly. Ezra looked up, a flash of something, fear, wisdom beyond his years, crossing his face. "Some stories aren't meant to be told," he whispered. The community center continued its quiet symphony of human movement. Refugees shared hushed conversations, children played in small corners, volunteers moved with purposeful dedication. But beneath the surface, a current of uncertainty ran deep. Governor Thornbridge's conversation with Elena continued, her words carefully chosen. "We're facing unprecedented challenges. Difficult decisions must be made." Daniel watched, his notebook ready. He knew stories like these, stories of displacement, of human resilience, were more than just news. They were windows into the most fundamental human experiences of loss, hope, and survival. As the day wore on, Ezra remained in his corner. A quiet observer, a bearer of secrets. The community center around him continued its work, a small beacon of hope in a world of uncertainties. The Forgotten Path. The mountain research station stood like a sentinel against the rugged landscape, its steel and glass structure a stark contrast to the wilderness surrounding it. Gabriel Nakamura adjusted his communication equipment, his former military intelligence training evident in every precise movement. Sophia Lindbergh approached, her weathered hiking boots leaving soft imprints in the morning frost. As a local community leader, she had seen how global conflicts and displacement affected even the most remote regions. "We've received another set of encrypted transmissions," Gabriel murmured, his fingers dancing across a complex array of monitoring devices. "Something's not adding up." The transmissions spoke of movement, refugees, border crossings, but with an underlying pattern that suggested something more complex than typical migration. Each intercepted message seemed to hint at a larger narrative just beyond comprehension. Nearby, a secure communication line crackled to life. Thomas Blackwater's voice came through, deliberately measured. "We need a complete report by sundown," he instructed, the background noise suggesting he was in a mobile command center. Sophia watched Gabriel work, her community experience providing a different perspective to his technical approach. "These aren't just numbers," she said softly. "Each transmission represents human lives." Gabriel nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. His military background had taught him to see patterns, but Sophia reminded him that behind every pattern were individual stories of survival and hope. A breakthrough came mid-afternoon. A series of coordinates, seemingly random, began to form a pattern. Gabriel's eyes narrowed as he mapped the data points. "Look," he said, spreading out a series of digital maps. "These aren't random border crossings. There's a deliberate route being established." Ezra's face flashed in Sophia's mind, the young boy from the community center who seemed to carry more secrets than most adults. "The children," she whispered. "They're part of something bigger." Thomas Blackwater's voice returned, more urgent this time. "Maintain radio silence. We're escalating the investigation." As night fell, the research station became a hub of quiet intensity. Gabriel's equipment picked up fragmented communications, whispers of displacement, of children moving through complex networks that defied traditional border controls. "Who's coordinating this?" Sophia asked, her community leadership instincts sensing a larger humanitarian crisis. Gabriel's response was measured. "Not who, but why. These aren't random movements. There's a purpose behind these routes." A complex map emerged on the screens, a network of refugee paths that seemed to follow intricate, almost impossible routes. Each line represented not just a journey, but a story of survival, of hope beyond conventional boundaries. The forgotten path was revealing itself, one encrypted transmission at a time. As midnight approached, the research station stood as a silent witness to a narrative far more complex than simple border crossings. Gabriel, Sophia, and their team continued their vigil, understanding that each piece of information could mean survival for those most vulnerable. Threads of connection. The legal library felt like a fortress of knowledge, shelves towering with volumes of legal precedent and human rights documentation. Olivia Chen spread her case files across the massive oak table, her fingers tracing the intricate connections between displaced children and systemic challenges. Rafael Morales entered, bringing with him a stack of community testimony documents. "We're missing something," he said, his voice low and intense. "These children aren't just refugees. They're part of a larger network." Admiral Samuel Grayson's confidential report lay partially hidden among the documents, a thread that seemed to connect multiple narratives. Olivia noticed how the report's margins were filled with handwritten notes, suggesting layers of information not meant for ordinary eyes. "Look at this," she said, spreading out a series of mapped routes. The children's movement follows an almost mathematical precision. It's not random displacement, it's organized. Raphael leaned closer, his activist background providing a different perspective. "Someone is protecting these children," he observed. "But protecting them from what?" A secure communication device buzzed. The message was encrypted, but Olivia's legal training had taught her to read between the lines. Fragments of information suggested a complex humanitarian operation operating just beyond official channels. Ezra's face seemed to hover at the edge of their investigation, a key piece of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. The boy who had arrived at the border with nothing more than a worn piece of paper now represented something much larger. The routes, Raphael pointed out, they're not just crossing borders. They're creating a network of safe passages. Olivia's legal mind began connecting the dots. It's not about moving children. It's about preserving something, knowledge, perhaps. Or protecting a specific group of individuals. Admiral Grayson's report hinted at a deeper conspiracy. Annotations in the margins suggested a covert operation designed to protect children with specific genetic markers or unique capabilities. As night fell, the legal library transformed into a war room of information. Maps, testimonies, and encrypted communications created a complex web of connections. Each document told a story, of displacement, of survival, of a hidden network working to preserve something far more important than borders or bureaucratic regulations. "We're looking at a global operation," Olivia whispered, her fingers tracing the intricate routes. "Something that goes beyond traditional humanitarian efforts." Raphael nodded, understanding the weight of their discovery. "These children, they're not just refugees. They're something more." The threads of connection were slowly revealing themselves, a narrative of survival, protection, and a hope that transcended conventional understanding of borders and human movement. As midnight approached, Olivia and Raphael continued their investigation, knowing that each piece of information brought them closer to understanding a truth that had been carefully hidden from the world. The network of the displaced was far more complex than anyone had imagined, a silent revolution happening just beyond the reach of conventional perception. Unveiling the truth. The abandoned research facility stood as a silent witness to decades of secrets. Darian Foster moved carefully through its corridors, each step calculated, each breath measured. Years of working as an internal whistleblower had taught him the art of careful investigation. Natalie Warren arrived shortly after, her journalist's notebook tucked securely in her jacket. The facility's walls seemed to hold whispers of untold stories, fragments of a larger narrative that had remained hidden for too long. "The final pieces are coming together," Darian murmured, spreading out a collection of documents that seemed to connect the journeys of displaced children like Ezra to a much larger, more complex operation. General Richard Calloway's classified reports lay at the center of their investigation. Each page revealed layers of a humanitarian effort that went far beyond traditional border management, a network designed to protect and preserve something extraordinary. Ezra's story, which had begun as a simple border crossing, now represented something far more significant. The boy was not just a refugee, but a potential key to understanding a global network of protection. "It's about genetic preservation," Natalie realized, connecting the dots between the scattered documents. "These children, they're not just being moved. They're being protected." Darian nodded, years of investigative work crystallizing into a moment of profound understanding. The network of displaced children was actually a sophisticated mechanism of preservation, protecting individuals with unique genetic markers or capabilities that could be crucial to human survival. The research facility's abandoned laboratories told a story of scientific exploration and humanitarian intervention. Fragments of research suggested a global effort to protect children with extraordinary potential from forces that would seek to exploit or destroy them. "We're looking at a global underground network," Darian explained, his voice a mixture of awe and determination. "Not a conspiracy, but a protection mechanism." Natalie's journalistic instincts recognized the magnitude of their discovery. This was more than a story, it was a revelation about human resilience, about the lengths people would go to protect the most vulnerable. General Calloway's final report, partially redacted, hinted at a larger truth. The displaced children were part of a complex global strategy, a living repository of human potential, moved and protected through an intricate network that operated just beyond conventional understanding. As dawn broke, Darian and Natalie understood the true nature of their discovery. The children like Ezra were not victims, they were hope incarnate. A carefully orchestrated effort to preserve the most extraordinary aspects of human potential. "We can't publish everything," Natalie said softly. "Some truths are too dangerous." Darian agreed. Some stories needed to be protected, just as these children had been protected. Outside, the first light of day painted the abandoned research facility in hues of possibility. The network of the displaced had revealed its ultimate purpose, not just survival, but the preservation of humanity's most precious resource, its potential. The truth had been unveiled, but its full impact remained a promise, a whisper of hope carried by children who represented something far greater than any single border or bureaucratic system could comprehend.